Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar launch of the joint EEA and Eurofound report, Overheated and Underprepared, Europeans' Experience of Living with Climate Change. My name is Marianne Dons-Tuxen, and I'll be your moderator for this session. But before we get started, I just want to check that everyone can hear me all right. If so, please send us a thumbs up or let us know in the chat. Great, thank you. Before we get started, I also have a few quick housekeeping points. The session will last approximately 60 minutes, including time for questions and answers at the end. All participants will be on mute during the session to ensure smooth audio quality. Therefore, if you have any questions during the session, please submit them through the chat function and we'll address as many as possible during the dedicated Q&A segment. The webinar is also being recorded and will be made available afterwards on the EEA and Eurofound and European Climate and Health Observatory websites. If there are any technical issues, please let us know in the chat. We're otherwise delighted to see so many participants here today, including policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and members of the public who are interested in climate adaptation and resilience. We look forward to a lively and informative discussion during this webinar. We'll be hearing more about the experiences of Europeans in a changing climate. Thank you for joining us today. I'd now like to hand over to Blaž Kunik, my colleague from the European Environment Agency, who is the head of the Climate Risk and Resilience Unit, who will provide some short welcome remarks to kick off. Blaž, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Marianne, to giving me the word and this warm introduction. I'm also pleased today to welcome you at this webinar and the launch of our latest report on climate adaptation and resilience in Europe. The report is a result of joint work together between the European Environment Agency and Eurofound, we are both partners under the in the European Climate and Health Observatory. The observatory is an initiative jointly managed by the European Commission and the EEA, and the main objective of this observatory work is to develop the knowledge and tools on climate change and health, to support the public health decision making and also policy action in Europe. For this report, the EEA and Eurofound have worked together, combining our strengths and areas of expertise, notably on the EEA side, the scientific assessment of the climate risks, and the Eurofound side, which basically work on the wide insights into people's lived experiences. We have almost 2 years ago published the European Climate Risk Assessment. And this assessment provided an analysis of the climate risks, and extreme heat and wildfires, flooding have been flagged and also presented in quite on the high on the agenda, and they are linked to the climate sensitive diseases and also the people's well-being and health. European Climate Risk Assessment identified 36 different risks, and many of these risks are the critical, and some of them even at the catastrophic level, and this will change and continue even in the direction that majority of the risk might be at the critical level by the end of the century. European Climate Risk Assessment also presented the risks are important to be addressed, important in order to understand the societal preparedness, how to deal with risk, and how to increase the Europe's society resilient to these risks which are already with us and which are coming in the future. It is also important that we need to work on improving the societal preparedness by looking into how people's well-being and health is being preserved and even improved in order to fulfill our other priorities of the EU, namely like competitiveness, security, resilience, and so on. So it's really important that to follow these priorities, we need to look into the human aspects, in particular the human health. In this report, the Eurofound's contribution is essential. Based on the results of the Eurofound's 2025 survey of living and working in the EU, the results provide Europe's wide insight how people are experiencing climate change, how concerned they are, and what are the adaptation measures they have in place, and how they need to actually work in order work together to improve these adaptation measures. It's also important to communicate these results to the authorities, which they need to enhance the measures and also support the measure through the political developments, but also through the financial developments. Together, this collaboration allows us to connect the dots between the scientific part, scientific risks, and lived experience, highlighting inequalities, gaps, and adaptation, and opportunities for action. Also, this report provides a more holistic picture, what is happening, who is affected, and what we can do to strengthen Europe resilience. I would like to also thank everyone having an active role in this report, in particular on the EA side, Sasha, who was basically preparing the report together with other colleagues working on the observatory, and Michele on the Eurofound side, who was also working very closely with my colleagues, and really would like to thank you to all the work you have done. I would now like to give back the word to Marianne, who will introduce the speakers and navigate you through the webinar. Thank you very much again for joining the webinar, and thank you for listening, and hope you will learn in this webinar more. Thank you very much, and give the word back to Marianne. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Blaž. Yes, it's now my pleasure to introduce our two main speakers for this webinar. Joining us from Copenhagen is my colleague Sasha Moski, who is a climate change consultant with the EEA and is also part of the European Climate and Health Observatory team. In addition, we have from Dublin, Michele Consolini, and he is a research officer with Eurofound. Both have been part of the teams of experts at the EEA and Eurofound that have been responsible for developing the survey and the report, and they are therefore in a good position to present the main findings and conclusions of the report, and to also provide some reflections on the broader implications of these. Sasha and Michele, the floor, or rather the screen, is now yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone joining today online. I'm Michele, and I'm going to present a little bit some of the first part of these findings. Of course, this work couldn't have happened without our other colleagues, Marianna Baggio, which is here online, Marie Highland, and Esther Shandor. So I just wanted to mention also their very, very important contribution. So as of today, we know both from the UCRA but also from Copernicus data from 25 that Europe is the fastest warming continent. And we've all seen the images of extreme heat, droughts, wildfire, flooding, and climate-sensitive diseases increasing across Europe. And this is especially affecting Southern and Central Eastern Europe. But as we are now in Dublin, which is in this moment a yellow warning for floods, we know that it's not only linked to those places, it's all around Europe. And we know that all European member states have adopted some national adaptation plans, but there's still limited information on the implemented action. And in particular, these gaps raise an important question, which is, what does this mean for people's everyday lives, how their lives are affected, how our lives are affected, and are we feeling protected against this kind of measures? So in order to understand all these measures, which adaptation measures have been picked up by the people, but also which are the most effective and accessible, we decided to run a survey in collaboration with the EEA. And we thought of this as a very important tool to capture how people perceive and experience climate change and what is general sentiment of people around this issue. So in the next slide, we can see our the main research questions that drove this report and this collaboration, and also drove the shaping up of the survey. And in the next slide, we can see a little bit what Eurofound does in terms of our survey. This is an e-survey, which is a non-representative survey that is mostly run online, that is solely run online. And in order to address for the non-representative sample, we use several techniques to make sure that the results in the end are comparable to a general population. And in general, what we do, we ask a lot of different questions. Every year we focus on a different topic. And this year in particular, or I should say last year, 2025, it was focused on environmental concerns and adaptation measures. So in the next slide, you can see a little bit of a structure of how we decided to structure this couple of questions that we crafted with our colleagues in the EEA, and they verge around four main aspects, and we thought about this as the closest to an individual, which is their concern. So how much they're worried about environmental change, how much they are worried about the climate in general, and then in their local circles, how much they've been impacted by some extreme weather events. Following, we also asked which kind of measures they decided, so their individual preparedness, and finally, which kind of measures they've seen being implemented or they've known of in their local area, be it their neighborhood, their city, and so on and so forth. Of course, alongside these very important questions, we also ask several other questions that in the next slide we can briefly discuss. So we ask where they live, of course, so both in terms of their country and the region, but also whether they live in a rural or urban settlement. We ask, of course, their age. We ask their health status, whether they are healthy, whether they suffer from long-standing issues. We ask their level of urbanization again. We ask their financial means, so whether they can make ends meet, for instance, whether they have arrears on several aspects, or whether they feel materially deprived. For instance, they cannot pay for leisure time, they cannot pay for replacement furniture, and so on and so forth. Of course, we ask some questions about their gender, their tenure, so housing is a big important part, and of course we also ask about their trust, both at the individual level, at the institutional level, but also trust between people and feeling recognized by the government, and feeling that their community is also recognized in the political discussion. Over the past 5 years, Eurofound conducted a survey roughly every year, and for now, we gathered around 250,000 respondents across Europe. We have a panel as well, which helps us tracking people over time, and we have some core questions that we always ask, and for which we can do some interesting analysis. Again, it's not a representative panel, but it's still at least 35,000 people answered to 2 points in time, which allows us for some interesting in comparison. So again, the e-survey asks questions about how people are experiencing climate change, and whether this is the same that the UCRA report tells us, and which is in general, we're like, what are the levels of concern across Europe, whether people are taking actions, and what are the general state in their local area. So after this brief introduction, I'll give the floor to Sasha for more in-depth description of the results.
Thank you very much, Michele, for introducing us to the survey. And now I'm going to talk us through some of the key findings, and jumping right into the heart of it, let's look at what climate change impacts people reported experiencing. So in the survey, we asked people about which of these 8 different climate change impacts they experienced. And from the survey, we learned that 80% of respondents reported having experienced at least one impact of those listed in the survey. And from the results as well, we see that heat was the main climate impact encountered by survey respondents, and that is true across different settings, including at home, in their neighborhood, and at their place of work or education. After heat, an increase in insect bites and wind damage were the second and third most reported impacts. 34% of respondents reported a perceived increase in mosquito or tick bites. This finding reflects evidence that the abundance of vectors and the length of the biting season is rapidly increasing under a changing climate. And finally, wind damage was experienced by roughly 14% of respondents. Apart from that, all of the other climate impacts listed in the survey had been experienced by around 1/10 of the respondents. So while the European level data tells one story, looking at the data disaggregated by country tells another. The findings from the survey show that there are many geographical differences in how Europeans experience climate change impacts. For example, wildfires and their smoke were most commonly experienced by respondents from Greece, Portugal, and Cyprus. And this showed very high percentages compared to an average of 8% across Europe as a whole. Likewise, the percentage of respondents who had experienced flooding over the last 5 years reflected the pattern of large-scale floods during the same time. So for example, a much higher percentage of respondents in Austria and Slovenia reported having experienced flooding than the overall European average of 11%. Also to note here that we have developed a country level data viewer. And so if you're interested in exploring more of the country level findings, you can access the data viewer and dive a bit deeper into some of the geographical differences that came through with the data. We also looked at differences between people living in urban and rural settings. And for example, people who lived in more urban environments reported more experiences of heat, suggesting potentially the influence of the urban heat island effect in urban areas. In contrast, more urbanized settings had lower percentages of respondents reporting that they had been affected by wind, flooding, or issues with access to water than their rural counterparts. This difference may reflect different levels of investment in hazard reduction, as well as different forms of the environment between urban and rural settings. Through the survey, we also looked at differences around age and gender and experiences of climate change impacts. And the survey told us that depending on age, people experience climate change impacts differently. So for almost all of the climate-related impacts included in the questionnaire, a higher percentage of younger respondents experienced them compared to the oldest group. And this also aligns with the finding from the survey that younger respondents reported being consistently more concerned about future climate change impacts than older groups. In the survey, there was not a significant difference between how men and women experience climate change impacts, except for one of the variables, which was experiences of insect bites. And for that, there was a slight difference with women experiencing them to a greater extent. Also from the survey, we learned that people with less financial means experience more impacts. And with nearly all of the impacts listed, with the exception of heat, which there was no significant difference between people in different financial situations, a higher percentage of respondents in more difficult financial situations reported being impacted compared to those who did not struggle financially. So more than double the number of respondents from the group which was struggling financially noted being impacted by wildfires compared to respondents not struggling. Similarly, there was a significant difference between the groups and their experiences with insect bites. And finally, around 4 times more struggling households, and those, I mean, the households that struggled financially had problems accessing water compared to their counterpart. So moving on to the next sort of topic within the survey was we asked about people's experiences and level of concern for future climate change impacts. So again, we asked about these specific climate change impacts listed here and found that the survey results showed that nearly half of the respondents were very concerned or quite concerned about extremely high temperatures. The second most concerning issue for respondents was more frequent or extreme forest fires. And this finding corroborates that of UCRA, which identifies heat and wildfires as among the most severe risks to human health and well-being, and a risk that requires some of the most urgent action. From the survey, we also saw that respondents from Southern and Central Eastern Europe were reported higher levels of concern compared to counterparts in Northern Europe, and that women and younger people also tended to be more concerned. And just to conclude on this section, a similar number of respondents, approximately 43%, were very or quite concerned about reduced access to local and seasonal food, safe drinking water, and more frequent or extreme flooding also came up as a concern. But you can really see here across all of the different factors that were included, quite a high level of concern. So moving to the next section, in the survey, we also asked respondents about what actions they're taking at home to prepare for climate change. And these are the measures that are included in the survey. But before we move on to discuss the results, I thought we could take a moment to ask all of you what sort of measures you have taken at home to prepare against climate change impacts. So a colleague, Agata, will launch the poll, and if you could all reflect on and which of these measures you have taken at home in the last 5 years to bolster your resilience to climate change impacts. Great, I can see lots of results coming in. I'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to respond here. Yeah, very interesting. I can see already this is a bit of a teaser for what will come next. Perfect. Yeah, thanks all for responding. Very interesting to see how this group's response aligns a little bit with what the rest of Europe told us through the survey. And now I'll just jump into sharing some of the results related to what people are doing to prepare at home. So from the survey, we learned that 78% had at least one measure in place, but no single measure was in place in more than half of the homes. So this suggests a bit of divergence in what people are doing to prepare, perhaps depending on sort of the hazards most relevant to their local area. From the survey as well, like the other questions, we learned that the preparedness levels often varied by age, gender, tenure status, and financial means. And quite similar to what we just saw through the poll that we ran just now, 3 of the 4 top most common measures in place in the home among the survey respondents are designed to protect against extreme heat. So this includes shading, insulation, and air conditioning, which again aligns with that findings from the European Climate Risk Assessment, which identifies heat as one of the most extreme climate risks that we face. Verifying home insurance was also a popular measure, and it was selected by approximately 40% of respondents. Another data point we had access to via the survey was the affordability of home cooling. So when asked if they could afford to keep their home adequately cool in the summer, 38% of all survey respondents indicated that they could not. Central Eastern Europe had the highest percentage of respondents who struggled to afford home cooling. And in some countries, such as Poland, Lithuania, and Slovakia, there was also quite a high percentage of respondents who struggled to afford home cooling. And this data point here perhaps connects to a wider issue of the issue of affordability of adaptation measures and highlights the need to develop policies and measures that can keep people safe regardless of their financial means during extreme weather events. Another interesting finding from the survey was that some of the lowest personal preparedness measures in place were the ones designed to protect against all hazards. And so from the survey data, we found that the results in general reflect a general state of underpreparedness in regards to sort of all hazards. And this includes having measures such as an emergency kit or place or a backup power supply. So these were quite low across all respondent groups. And this finding is particularly concerning in light of recent calls by many national governments to bolster personal preparedness in the context of preparedness for both climactic and non-climactic hazards. So moving on to look at how tenure, so renter versus owner households are prepared for climate change impacts at home. So fewer renters reported having household level climate resilience measures in place compared to homeowners. And you can see that quite clearly in this graph here. And in particular, the percentage of homeowners who had insurance in place, air conditioning or ventilation system, or a backup power source was almost double that compared to people who rent. Interestingly, though, when looking at the differences between urban and rural respondents, a higher percentage of those living in more rural settings had implemented climate resilience measures at home compared to those living in more urbanized areas. So for rural respondents, they were 3 times more likely to have rainwater collection systems in place or a backup power supply compared to urban residents, which could suggest a pattern of greater self-reliance among people living in more rural areas. Now considering the differences between different age groups, you can see through this graphic here that there's a disproportionate percentage of older residents who have household resilience measures in place compared to younger respondents. And this could be because older residents are more likely to be homeowners in some situations, of course, with some caveats. And they may also have been in their dwelling for a longer period of time, enabling them to perhaps make more longer term investments over a longer time horizon. Now, looking towards affordability as perhaps a key barrier for preparing at the household level for climate change impacts. And like I mentioned previously during the slide on the affordability of home cooling, cost may be one of the main obstacles to wider uptake of resilience measures. Nearly twice as many respondents who struggle financially had none of the climate resilience measures in place compared to those who were able to make ends meet easily. And then again, just to underscore that affordability is likely an obstacle for preparing to climate change impacts. Again, you can see across all measures the difference between these two groups, suggesting considerable inequalities are present between groups of different varying economic status in relation to household level preparedness, which just, for sure suggests an opportunity for action. So finally, in the survey, we asked people how and what measures they have seen in their own neighborhoods that have been put in place by authorities to bolster climate adaptation and preparedness. And while we're not going to do a survey here, I offer the opportunity to reflect a little bit on what sort of measures you've seen in your own neighborhood from the ones listed here on this screen. And from the survey, we learned that approximately 82% of respondents reported having seen at least one of the authority-led climate resilience measures in their local area. And of the measures listed, early warning systems and awareness campaigns were the two most cited measures, followed by water use restrictions during drought. Of the measures listed, there was a disproportionate number of respondents reporting soft or non-infrastructure based measures compared to more traditional hard infrastructure, such as like a flood prevention system. But this could be a sign that more of these communication heavy measures are actually reaching the people in the local area. And of all of the more physical measures listed in the survey, tree planting was the one most commonly reported by respondents. And just as there was variation in the household measures, observations of climate adaptation measures also varied by demographic group. And in the next couple slides, I will highlight some of these differences, starting with the difference between regions in Europe. So you can see here that Central Eastern Europe was the region with actually the highest percentage of response reporting that they had encountered authority-led adaptation measures. And in contrast, Northern Europe was the region with the lowest percentage of observations of the measures listed. Now looking at the measures that were least reported, of all of the measures listed, the two with the fewest respondents were the provision of cooling centers and changes to work or education schedule to avoid the hottest times of the day. This is an interesting finding in the context of heat being the hazard of greatest concern and also the hazard that most people have experienced, as it suggests that these type of more community-led measures to prepare for heat waves are not as widely seen in the local area. Again, looking at the difference between urban and rural experiences, there was a difference between the two, also for the authority-led measures. So people living in cities or towns reported seeing authority-led measures to a greater extent than those from more rural settings. And this was true for most of the measures except for water use restrictions and flood prevention, which were more commonly noted by people living in more rural settings. Finally, with regard to authority-led measures, a higher percentage of respondents in good financial standing reported having observed flood prevention, tree planting or urban greening, cooling centers, and awareness campaigns related to extreme weather than those who struggle to make ends meet. It is recognized in the literature that lower income groups may not always benefit fairly from adaptation, and this data underscores the importance of inclusive adaptation planning. And so with that, I will pass it back to Michele, who will say a few concluding words and contextualize some of the findings from the data before we move forward with the question period. Michele, back to you.
Yep, thank you so much, Sasha. And just a few points to link this individual perception-based results with the general context. So we can see that the finding of the survey do reflect the outcome of the UCRA. So we see that societal preparedness remains still low and policy implementation is quite lagging behind in compared to the quickly increasing risk levels. And it is very important that the planning phase gives way to the implementation phase, and this, of course, includes individual preparedness, such as actions to bolster household preparedness, emergency kits among all which are a low-hanging fruit for many households. But also, security concerns can boost individual preparedness for all hazards, as we say. Not surprisingly, communication and awareness-based measures are still the most noticed, and it's important to move forward and to scale up actions for infrastructure-based measures to shield people from impacts. And this includes both on the individual side with loans and grants for retrofitting the housing, and also public investments for the public goods. And finally, we see how respondents living outside cities were less likely to report having seen adaptation measures implemented in their areas. And this is usually because larger cities have been the champions to some extent of adaptation actions in the last couple of decades, and it's very important to roll out the same efforts in smaller municipalities and rural areas, which may not be reached by so many funds, and that's why it's very important that new funding should go into towns and local municipalities, especially because, according to a recent study, towns are in comparison much showing much less trust and political support, deficiencies in staff capacity to identify and finding opportunities, and difficulty in meeting the conditions for requirements for different sources of funding. So there's almost like a double layer of disadvantage there. And finally, if we move to the last slide, heat is still a very it's a key priority for adaptation planning, especially as the UK identifies heat as a critical risk to human health, with severity of its impact intensifying in the future. And this will be seen more and more, not only in the living conditions, but also in the working conditions, especially when high temperature will reach an unsustainable point, both for outside workers, agricultural workers, and factory workers. And on the more individual side, increasing the availability and affordability of household measures, and complemented with authority-led actions, is another area that policymakers could explore further to improve the climate resilience of European society. This is very important, especially for people struggling making ends meet, which may not have the funds, let alone the actual physical household, as someone was saying in the comment, to actually implement some of the changes in their house, or may not have the knowledge and the guidance for implementing these changes as well. So this is again something that will definitely affect lower income people, younger people as well, increasing the gap between those who can afford doing the changes and those who cannot, but also those who actually trust the political vision or the policies to actually make the change, and those who do not trust and do not think the government or the political institution is working for their benefits. And this is another very important part of policies, which is the policy acceptance, but also policy support. So the fact that measures for households are in place doesn't necessarily mean that people will actually take them up. So uptake is strongly linked to whether people support the policies, and this is part of the report that we will be writing and publishing over the course of the year. And again, those who are more impacted, those who see climate change more present in their lives, will definitely be reflected in following up with new actions. But also it's important to not forget about vulnerable citizens who may not be aware of the general situation, but they are the ones at most risk. I think especially those with poor health or self-reported poor health, are showing much less willingness to take actions because of the status, but also they are those who are the most impacted, especially with rising temperatures and poor housing conditions. So without urgent action to protect EU's most vulnerable citizens, climate impacts are likely to further worsen people's health, keeping these people in a negative feedback loop. With that, I think we finished this presentation. Here you can check out both the full report and you can view the brilliant data dashboard that our colleagues at the EEA produced. Very informative and very playful as well. So thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Michele and Sasha, for this excellent presentation, which clearly outlined the main findings of the report and put the conclusions into a broader perspective. We will now move on to the Q&A part of the session. And I invite all of you to post your questions in the chat, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible. While you're doing that, and to kick off, I'll start by asking a few questions of my own to our two speakers. So, as outlined in your presentation, it's important for us to connect the dots between the scientifically assessed risks and those provided, such as those provided in the European Climate Risk Assessment, and people's experience of living with and adapting to these risks. But can you say a bit more about how we should interpret these self-reported experiences by citizens compared to the science-based assessed risks? Where do they align and where do they not? And what are the implications of this? Sasha, perhaps you can address this point.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the question, and Marianne, I can take this one. So the European Climate Risk Assessment, or EUCRA, provides a scientifically robust assessment of where and how climate risks are emerging, and it's based on climate projections and rigorous data on exposure and vulnerability. Essentially, it tells us what the risks are and where they're most likely to intensify, but it doesn't necessarily reflect how these risks are influencing the lived experiences of Europeans. And that's where the self-reported data can come in and complement the more rigorous scientific assessment to capture how these risks are being felt directly by people and how they might influence their health, their well-being, how they experience their work or their home, and also whether people are taking action to protect themselves from these risks, or if more urgent action is needed in that regard. And in many instances, the data that emerged through the survey actually aligns with the findings from the European Climate Risk Assessment. So for example, the prominence of heat as a major risk underscores the urgency of action, as that was a key finding of both EUCRA as well as the data from this report. And even in instances where perhaps there's not full alignment, it can still be an important complementary source, as looking at different local perspectives and different regional differences can really support the design of policy measures and adaptation measures that reflect the diverse experiences of Europeans. And this self-reported data is an important contributor to that. And then just maybe to quickly conclude that the two data sources are super important for painting a full picture of how climate risks are impacting people's daily lives.
Thanks so much, Sasha, for shedding light on that. Turning to the survey and the survey results, which underpin the findings of this report, Michele, Could you say anything about whether the survey results were weighted to account for differences in population size, age, or urban-rural distribution across the countries that were sampled?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is one of the questions that keep on popping up, especially related to the e-survey, because being a non-representative survey, a lot of people question the validity of the data. And again, as it started as a small experiment, apologies, it developed into more and more a structured survey. And the reason why it's not representative is because it's an online only survey, which is run through online advertisements on mostly social media. But with social media, we can target certain parts of the population that would be underrepresented otherwise. So there's a correction in the survey error, let's say, in that sense. But also we do weight our survey based on official statistics and based on population. So the data will approximate for a general population. Of course, there are some biases that we cannot correct, like the fact that we cannot capture people that are not online and people that are more willing to answer surveys online than other people that would just probably look at the ad and skip it, for instance. So these are something that we cannot control for. But when it comes to general sociodemographic stratification by degree of urbanization, country, and general population for that country, for that region, and for that urban or rural settlement, this is something that we can do to better reflect the numbers that we collect online to the possible general population.
Thank you, Michele. Well, on the topic of demographic profiles, I mean, we find the report that young people reported a higher concern about future climate impacts, yet older people have more adaptation measures in place. So how should policymakers interpret and respond to this generational gap? Sasha, is that something you could shed more light on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Marianne. Another interesting question. Yeah, the survey results show that younger people are often more concerned about future climate impacts and also experience them to a greater extent, but at the same time reported lower levels of personal preparedness. And this, I think, also links to some evidence around young people and the rise of mental health impacts, including climate anxiety, which should certainly be taken into consideration when designing policies and measures to support all people in preparing for climate change impacts. And interestingly, younger people did tend to have fewer adaptation measures in place, and this could largely be because younger people tend to perhaps have lower incomes, are more likely to be renters. And I think that this is definitely a bigger one, having less control over your housing situation. Perhaps there's less incentive or means or that longer term outlook to invest in measures that can support you in the long term and bolster your personal resilience. And this is in contrast to older respondents who may be more likely to be homeowners and have more of a longer term outlook. But at the same time, I think smaller actions that are portable and can support overall resilience, such as home emergency kits, are a fairly low-hanging fruit and are relatively cost sensitive and are also adaptable to people who are both young and old and living in different types of housing situations. And that is something relatively affordable, can really make a big difference in the days following some sort of impact.
Thanks, Sasha. Michele, I also have a question for you on the policy aspects. So how do you think that these findings can better be integrated into EU and national adaptation cycles going forward?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I also see the question that George posted in the chat, which is exactly his second point about the results of this survey. And I think it's quite important that this perception-based results are actually very informative for policymakers, because they do inform on what are the people's feelings and what they can or cannot do, especially when it comes to the immediate measures they can take. And it's also very important in a time with the just transition is claiming to leaving no one behind. Having the snapshot of which are the people that are struggling or cannot afford to do some retrofits or take some measures, although they may actually want to do that, really provide a very valuable information for policymakers to actually focus their intervention on certain specific groups in society, especially in a time of very tight budgets for environmental or social policies, as someone was mentioning in the chat as well. It's very important to use this result to guide strategic use of public budget, let's say. And it also identifies opportunities for improving policy design and implementation by offering policymakers some very actionable insights of what people are doing and what are the low-hanging fruits, and whether these low-hanging fruits can be expanded or extended to more and more people. So hopefully there will be some use in this sense.
Thanks, Michele. Yeah, you addressed partly a question that we've had in the chat, but we have a specific one relating to how these results can help to contrast the rise of climate denialists, potentially far-right actors, especially given the results shared concerning young people. So the measures you mentioned presumably can help to combat this. Or any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So in the forthcoming report that we're drafting, Eurofound, which doesn't only focus on the preparedness measure, but in general on behavioral changes regarding the green transition, what we've seen is that a lot of people who are distrusting the government or distrusting political institutions in general are and do not feel recognized by the political interest, do tend to veer off more rejection. So they would reject policies, even though they are, let's say, more incentive-based, which means that they actually offer something to people. I think it's very important here to remember that regardless the political affiliation, there's a very strong component of what is social media and how social media is used to communicate some of the notions we know now with the recent developments on fake news, deep fakes, etc. That there's a lot of efforts put by the Commission to limit this kind of disinformation online, and definitely has an impact. But also what we see is that the percentage of people believing that climate change is not happening in the e-survey is rather small. So we have very few people that are actually reporting this as their personal conviction. Still non-deniable that there is a part of the population that is in that believe this, but at the same time, a lot of work is done by lack of trust in general when it comes to political institutions.
Thank you. We also have a question as to whether or not the survey that's been conducted is going to be recurring as a monitoring instrument. Michele, perhaps you would like to address this one as well.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question. Indeed, it's always very nice to see interest for collecting data, especially in this field, because it seems quite rare to have such a detailed survey on the topic. There will be some questions, especially concerning the environmental concerns that may stay in the survey in the next rounds, probably not the whole battery about adaptation and preparedness, but usually what we've done in the past is that every 2 years we may run certain questions again, so that instead of having a yearly report, we may have a every 2 years. So every other year we would ask similar questions to see then trends because of the panel that we have. It's a very good opportunity to do that. But there will be maybe 1 or 2 questions retained from this into next year.
We also have a question as to who are the actual beneficiaries of the report. Is it the European Commission? Is it the Parliament? Is it national governments? And do we expect the findings to be used for specific policy recommendations? Sasha, perhaps you would like to address this point.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The report is really intended to bring some data to the experiences of Europeans. I think many of the findings perhaps there's things that we sort of know intuitively or kind of experience in our daily lives, but now through the results of the survey, we can actually translate some of these observations into more data-backed evidence, which of course we hope can land on the desk of policymakers at the Commission as well as in the Parliament. And because we also have the data available for national, at the country level, we also hope that this report will be taken up by national governments as well.
Thank you, Sasha. We also have a question here regarding who should be responsible for dealing with climate change impacts at the national level, and whether or not we are considered asking people more specifically about who they think should be responsible in their country or region for adaptation measures. Michele, perhaps you could address this question.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much. I was actually reading at the question at the moment, and I think people will do what people can, right? So there's only as much people can do to change, to have a meaningful impact on the small scale, be it not driving less, for instance, or cycling more. Like all of these are very important behavioral aspects, behavioral changes that contribute to the general standing of society. But there are definitely some policies that have to be taken and some decisions that have to be taken top down. And generally, we distinguish 2 types of policies. We have restriction or restrictive policies, such as increasing carbon taxes, ban appliances, or banning vehicles like internal combustion engine vehicles. And then there are more incentive-based policies, such as loans, grants, subsidies for public transport, and so on and so forth. And what we've seen in our recent article that we just published a month ago, we see that people do like incentive-based policies and do not like restrictive policies. So this gets very tricky when it comes to governments or even at the EU level to take actions, for instance, banning internal combustion engine by 2030 or 2035, and then the huge backlash that received. So it's very difficult, I think, to see long-term national or supranational policy effects, especially when they come from restricting some behaviors. and asking people their perceptions about what they do will definitely give a lot of answers, because they are in control of some of the actions they can take. But regardless, the premise, top-down decisions, or like national or supranational decisions, have to be taken to curb emissions and to implement changes, especially allocating funds towards improvements of living conditions, working conditions, rural and urban settlements, and so on and so forth. What we see, and with this I will close, is that not many countries have behavioral insight offices in place, and this can really guide what people can do, or what are the measures that are very effective, because then they would actually measure it based on what people would change and how they would change it. And if a lot of like top-down measures are taken, they may not be as effective, and therefore, as the question, it would feel like a lot of responsibility is onto people and not onto general institutions.
We also have a question as to whether or not a survey is planned for preparedness and adaptation when it comes to urban planning. Michele, perhaps you can also respond to that.
Not in the near future. So we did a few questions on housing, a few rounds on housing and neighborhoods, but nothing specifically on urban planning.
I see that we still have a number of questions in the chat. However, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and therefore we will now close the session. However, for any questions that we were not able to address, you're welcome to contact us either directly to the speakers or to the European Climate and Health Observatory. We would like to thank you for joining the discussion today, and especially to our two speakers for their presentation and answers to your many excellent questions. We hope that today's webinar has given you a clear sense of the evidence, challenges, and opportunities that lie ahead. It's evident that the climate impacts are no longer abstract or distant, that they shape the daily life for millions of Europeans, and that strengthening resilience therefore requires both collective and local action, and that this should be informed by solid data, such as what has been presented here today. We hope you'll take time to read the full report, which you can find on the EEA and Eurofound websites. And as I mentioned, please reach out to us if you have any additional questions. On behalf of the EEA and Eurofound, thank you again for being part of this launch event. We wish you a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars and discussions. Goodbye.